Welcome to the Organic Wine Podcast. Hi, this is Adam Huss, coming to you from Los Angeles. Thanks so much for listening to the Organic Wine Podcast. Our guest for this episode is Elizabeth Whitlow, Executive Director of the Regenerative Organic Alliance. The Regenerative Organic Alliance is the nonprofit that administers Regenerative Organic Certification. And if you haven't heard of Regenerative Organic Certification, then it's my great pleasure to introduce you to what I hope will become the new global standard for viticulture and agriculture. Elizabeth walks us through how ROC, or ROC, Regenerative Organic Certification, was created to address some of the lacks for the current National Organic Certification by creating standards for soil health, animal welfare, and social equity. It's that last part that we focus on in this interview, labor and worker treatment specifically. ROC combines standards from fair trade certifications and other respectful labor practices to build one of its three pillars on one of the most overlooked aspects of wine, the people who grow it. It goes without saying that the first step in treating vineyard workers well is to not have them work in an environment polluted with poisonous pesticides and herbicides. But the need for honoring these workers goes far beyond this, and the issues around agricultural labor are extremely complicated and global. Elizabeth digs into some of these and presents solutions that the Regenerative Organic Certification is aiming to achieve. But at the end of the day, our attitudes and choices as consumers may have the most power of all. Each one of us has incredible power to change the way our food and wine is grown. We vote for the way we want our fellow humans, the farm workers, to be treated multiple times per day with every bite of food or sip of wine that we take. If we feel entitled to cheap wine and food, well, we might get it, but someone's paying for it. Farming is hard work and risky. With climate change, it's getting harder and riskier. And it creates not only our personal health and well-being, but the health and well-being of the entire global ecosystem. Maybe it's time we start considering what that is actually worth. A big thanks to Elizabeth for this great interview and for the work that she is doing with the Regenerative Organic Alliance to give us all a way to improve the lives of farm workers around the world. Enjoy! Hi, Elizabeth. Welcome to the Organic Wine Podcast, and thanks for having this conversation.
Hey, Adam. I am really happy to be here. Thanks so much for inviting me.
It's really my pleasure. By way of introduction, you are the executive director of the Regenerative Organic Alliance, which is the nonprofit that provides regenerative organic certification, right?
That's it. You got it.
Awesome. I just wanted to start by just reading something from your website, from the Regenerative Organic website. And it's this. Our vision. We envision a world free of poisonous chemicals, factory farming, exploitation, and income inequality, soil degradation, habitat destruction, pollution, short-term thinking, corporate bullies, greenwashing, and fake food. Instead, we imagine a world in which farmers, brands, policymakers, educators, researchers, and individuals join together to create a healthy food system that respects land and animals, empowers people, and restores communities and ecosystems through regenerative organic farming.
Yeah.
And I love that.
Me too.
I wanted to read it because I love it. There's so many things about it I love, but honestly, it's the vision behind like why Wendy and I started our winery here in South Los Angeles. And I just think I want people to hear that because it's a really beautiful and wonderful vision that
Thank you.
think we should all share.
I can tell you where we came
ahead,
with that vision.
Please.
It was really fun. It was the first in-person board retreat. And it was when Rose Macario was still the CEO at Patagonia and fearless leader on our board. And we were all gathered on the coast of California in a cold, blustery January at this place called the Mushroom Farm in Pescadero.
Nice.
And not those kind of mushrooms, although with David Bronner involved, you would never know because he's deeply invested in that psilocybin for healing and for all kinds of purposes. But anyway, we were there at this really cool budding facility for regenerative organic on the coast there. And we were working on it. I was like, all right, we've got to work on this mission, vision, values statement. And it just came together so organically. And we had this wonderful person helping us in communications. And we had this meeting, everybody brainstorming. And Zoe goes away, and then she comes back and really basically reads it out. And we all let out a cheer, especially after the greenwashing and the fake food part. And, we also just came with our mission at that time, I think, which is also equally beautiful, that we exist to heal a broken system, repair a damaged planet, and empower farmers and eaters to create a better future through regenerative organic agriculture. And that sentence, it's just really powerful. And I think, if we let that be everything we do and lead us in all our efforts, then we're going to do all right.
Yep.
So.
Well, let's as a way to start with a big picture look at our food and beverage system that will get everyone's attention. I know that you have at your fingertips some pretty startling statistics about the U.S. food system, and I'm wondering if you can just sort of pull some stuff out of your pocket, like, that would some statistics.
Sure. I mean, I think you're probably referring to the fact that only 1%, it's actually less than 1% of our farm land is managed organically. So that means 99+% is commonly going to be receiving chemical applications. And by chemical applications, I'm talking about conventional agrochemicals, herbicides, pesticides, fungicides, and things that really are there to destroy life. And so if we look at that and think about the opportunity there to really turn this around, that we've got that much land to convert to organic, that, I try to look at that and think about the more hopeful side of that equation, that, okay, we've got a lot of work to do, but we've got a lot of opportunity. I think the other part is just that, we've been talking, we've been talking a little longer than we've been recording, but, we're losing 30 soccer fields of soil every minute. And
Wow.
So since you've started recording, we've lost quite a few soccer fields.
Wow.
Of soil. And, it's another interesting statistic about topsoil is we're losing it at a rate 10 times faster than it is being replenished. Wow. And so, with soil being such a keen focus for us here at the Regenerative Organic Alliance, anything we can do to keep soil in the ground, keep it covered, building healthy soil, building that soil microbiome is going to help us, prevent all kinds of other problems that come along with the loss of our topsoil. And scientists are estimating that we only have 50 or 60 harvests left as topsoil blows away. Like, what are we going to do then? We can't eat out of a hydroponic factory, So, yeah, preserving that soil and keeping it on the ground is I think, really one of the most important things we can do.
And I've heard a statistic you've mentioned about how far our food travels to get to our plate, like on average. What is that one?
Well, I think my stat on that is way off. But when I first became very really passionate about working in food and agriculture, was when I learned it was 1,600 calories. And I'm
Miles?
sure it's so much farther, or 1,600 miles, I'm sorry, for each calorie on your plate.
Whoa. Really?
Yeah. What do you have? What's yours?
No, that's kind of what I remember hearing from you. So I didn't
Well, I did some research on this a few years ago, and I saw it only increased to 1,800 or 2,000 miles, but it just can't be true. And I don't know who's out there quantifying this, but if you think about all the miles that are put between our food, we have such a global food supply now, and a lot of those statistics were probably done back when, Central California is feeding the world. Michael Pollan writes so well on this back with his Omnivore's Dilemma, and talked about, all the spent calories to get some lettuce to the table in, say, upstate New York in the middle of winter, and that it's, the carbon emissions and the fuel spent to get that plate of lettuce to the consumer's table far outweigh any calories that they absorb by eating it. So, just looking at that, the life cycle
Wow.
analysis or eco
Yeah.
footprint analysis of anything we eat, I think is just, it's a really powerful way to help guide your decisions and
Yeah.
and help drive your purchases to support your local food, local farmers, local food economy, local food shed. So yeah, it's a real passion for me. It's just like figuring out how to eat local. Now that said, I also have to say, like, this, I now here with the ROC, we are a very global program and we're working in many different countries. And so I don't want to sound like a hypocrite, but people do love their coffee and their chocolate and their coconut oil and
Yeah.
things like that. And those do have to travel quite a ways.
Yeah, no, I'm learning so much about this too. I mean, I know that there's like a a bay nut in California that might be like a coffee substitute if you're into stimulants and want
Yeah,
something local, that
yeah,
locally
yeah.
grown.
It's
Although
true.
we are growing coffee now in Santa Barbara, if
You
you
sure are. Yeah, that coffee's getting some acclaim, and it's actually really doing well in some of you know, the coffee cupping among
yeah,
coffee brokers and coffee buyers. It's actually performing really well, and I know of other folks in that region who are planting coffee and having success with it. I think that's just another indication of what's going on with climate change, and also,
yeah,
just knowing what's a real challenge for coffee growers around that subtropical zone where it's grown is that they've got this huge problem, really intractable problem with this disease called this coffee rust. And it's
oh yeah,
really hard to find the organic tools to fight the coffee rust. So
yeah,
it could be a time where, coffee is going to march north and high up, up in, at altitude here in the
yeah,
northern climate. So
yeah. I think bananas face a similar plight where there's like we eat one banana globally, and there's all it would take would be one blight, like you were saying, the coffee rust that would could wipe out the global banana trade.
yeah,
Um, anyway, it's very divergent
we
from,
diverge. Away from
but
wine. Well, it's the same with wine, though, Adam. And
yeah,
I'm in Sonoma County, and we have been. It's been declared like there is a drought emergency here, and they're looking for federal assistance for Sonoma and Mendocino, because this year we are just operating with very little water, and the grape growers and all the agriculture around here is going to be in peril. And I think also, vineyards are moving north, and the vineyards that are here, the varietals that were planted are going to have to change so
yeah,
that, yeah, they can adapt to this more, a lot longer dry period and hotter dry periods than we've been accustomed to in the past.
yeah. I've definitely covered a little bit of that on this podcast where I definitely believe that natives and hybrids with natives are the future of the
Hmm.
wine, if for so many reasons.
Yeah.
I've definitely made an effort to help listeners understand that nothing's perfect, first of all, but certainly organic certification, while it's a great first step, has some problems or some lacks maybe. Um, and I think that was known even at the outset of organic certification. But could you talk about why, because of that, it was considered important and necessary to create the regenerative organic certification?
Certainly. And just to give a little more background on the Regenerative Organic Alliance, or the ROA, is that we were founded by Patagonia Company and Dr. Bronner's and the Rodeo Institute. And so those three are huge supporters for organic. Obviously, if you know of Rodeo, they basically brought organic farming to the US many, many years ago with all their different publications, and they've got 40 years of research happening at their trial farm up in Pennsylvania. Patagonia and Bronner's have huge organic supply supply chain going on. So they do not want to go away from organic, but what they saw was this weakening of the organic rule where there was an allowance for more factory farms and where there was this pending really huge concern that hydroponics were going to be allowed for organic. And that is what happened in 2017, that the NOSB recommended that hydroponics be allowed for organic. And so they felt like the writing was really on the wall, that they needed to do something to essentially put a stake in the ground to like really keep the organic program strong. And so their idea was to create this framework that's based on organic, right? And so it builds from there. Organic is the baseline because that is the strongest label you can get right now,
Right.
really. But then they wanted to add in these other components, which we have three pillars. There's the soil health, the animal welfare, and then the social fairness. And I think we'll get into that in a little
Yes.
bit, but that social fairness to farmers and farm workers. That's something that will never be included in the National Organic Program law. Animal welfare should have, but it was removed by the Trump administration. And after many years of debate within the organic industry to improve the animal welfare regulations, finally got it approved. And then it basically was eviscerated. And so that has led to a
Wow.
lot of, more factory farms or very, very large scale dairies and poultry farms.
That
So
are also organic still.
they are organic. Yes, they are
Yeah.
organic. They are bringing in organic feed. If they're dairies, they have to meet this certain minimum of time on pasture, but we felt like you could do a whole lot better. And that if you
Yeah.
have pasture based systems and don't allow massive CAFOs or confined animal feedlot operations, that you allow those animals to lead a much healthier lifestyle. They can express their natural behaviors. They are not so prone to getting sick, just like us. You're out exercising and taking care of yourself. And if, say, you were a ruminant and designed to eat grass, that's what you eat mostly, you're going to be a lot healthier.
Yeah.
So, yeah, looking at supporting those systems and those types of operations. And then also with our emphasis on soil health, there was certainly some some lapses in the organic rule on tillage and cultivation, and there's been a huge rush into this sector of regenerative in since I came into this role. I mean, people were hardly able to say the word regenerative then, and now it's like on everybody's lips, and everybody's jumping in. From Cargill to Walmart, and so if you've got all these big players now seeing the fact that this concept of regenerative is it's really powerful and it resonates with people, and so the ROA exists to prevent this from being regen washed or greenwashed and being weakened. We want to keep this concept really strong and develop this high bar standard that demonstrates and clarifies really what regenerative can and should be, and that is a holistic type of agriculture that regenerates resources and also considers every living being in that farm system, from the soil microbiome to the animal to the worker.
That's cool. Yeah. And the worker aspect is really what, I when I reached out to you, that's the part that I was most interested in talking to you about. Because I feel like it's the most confusing or complicated and overlooked at times too, because it's, just because of who is working in the farms, in the vineyards, in these large operations. So can we start by sort of talking about what labor looks like in California? Let's say California, but any labor problems or statistics that you have for the U.S. in general. I mean, we'll come back to that. I just want to frame it because I think the problem that we're all aware of in the wine industry is that if you have more than a hectare or two of land that you're farming at a couple times a year only, you're going to need a large labor force, but
Yeah.
only for a short period of time.
Right.
And it's where do they come from if they're not there year round? Where do
Right.
those employees come from? And how do you care for them when they're not on your farm? Like what, like how do you just have people magically appear to prune in the winter and harvest in the fall
Yeah.
and then nothing in between? Um,
Yeah.
and that's just a reality. Like if you don't have a family of 12, and are farming your own, 12-acre farm, like
Right.
it's hard to manage without, bringing in people that aren't on your farm.
Yep.
Um, so
Absolutely.
yeah, so I mean, and this is I say that with complete empathy and just understanding, like no judgment, because we all know that that's just a reality of farming. In any capacity, whether it's grapes or anything that gets planted and then harvested later.
Yep.
So yeah, with that framework, can you add any any
Yeah.
understanding to the problems and statistics at all?
I can add a few things to that. So I would say first off, in this year and couple months now since COVID, I think we've all really seen the effects. There's been a really glaring spotlight placed on what is happening to marginalized communities, and farm workers would certainly be categorized in that group. And many of our farm workers, in fact, are not documented. They're undocumented immigrants who are coming here because the lure of the work, they know they can come up here and get work. And in fact, I think it's about 60 to 65% of our farm labor is coming
Yeah.
from this resource. So that makes them very prone to all kinds of unfair labor practices. And
Right.
really, those domestic realities of unfair labor practices in our entire food system usually go unseen, and they disproportionately affect those populations. I'd say it was really obvious what was going on to anybody who was watching the news last year, because we saw what happened to all those essential frontline workers in, say, the meat packing plants. They were getting sick in record numbers. And,
Right.
because they had to go to work. They don't have access to healthcare typically. They don't have health insurance. They can't afford to take a day off. They don't have fair, very safe working conditions all the time. And so, for those populations, it was a huge risk. And we saw it with the mortality rate among people who worked in that sector. So I think, addressing those problems with our labor situation here it's incredibly complicated. But we're trying to do it with our certification program that is basically bringing that fair trade certification model to the domestic market. There are some other entities doing this, and certainly there's other certifications that we recognize that are doing a great job with this. And I think, as we all begin talking about it more, then we're going to start solving some of these seemingly intractable problems. There's Equitable Food Initiative is doing great work with this. There's the Ag Justice Project social certification that is, I think they're still looking for a certifier for their project that has languished a bit, but they're more up in the Northeast. And Fair Trade USA, for example, they have some certifications they're doing here. But I believe our program, with that combination of the soil, animal, and human element, that we're going to really gain some traction, and we're really going to be able to help these workers get the kind of pay they deserve and get the working conditions they deserve, and also prevent things that are much more common than we'd like to believe, and that is the use of child labor and human trafficking.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
And you're talking, I'm guessing, globally, not just like California when you talk about these things, or are you specifically talking about California?
When I say here, I'm meaning domestically in the US.
Okay.
And how we've separated it out in our pillar is we're using somewhat politicized terms there of global South and global North.
Okay.
The fair trade certification schemes have been working and very present in the global South for probably 25, 30 years. And I have some very passionate members of my board who have been involved in that for nearly as long, probably. And like I think consumers are much more familiar with buying fair trade coffee, fair trade chocolate, um, fair trade bananas, because they've, those violations in those, um, those other countries, global south or developing, or however you want to call those countries, where they didn't have the same kind of labor laws and protections that we have here. Um, those violations were, really potent and disturbing for people to think that because they wanted to eat this nice chocolate bar that, children were enslaved in the production of it. Like, nobody can tolerate that.
Yeah.
Typically, I think a lot of those kind of ethical values are going to stop you from buying anything like that. So, the social fairness certifications are very much more in use in the global south. Here in the global north, or in the domestic markets of the US, of Europe, Australia, Japan, like there are more provisions there to protect the workers and allow for unions and collective bargaining and things like that. But still, we have a long way to go in this country, and especially because many of those workers are not documented, so they don't have as many protections.
Yeah, I imagine it's difficult w- covering all of those bases. I mean, in some cases, you're trying to prevent literally like slave labor of children, and in other
Yeah,
places, like I'm guessing that's not as big of a problem in California. I hope,
yeah,
um,
you'd hope.
but yeah, but there are other more concerns that are still here that are just of a different nature, a different caliber.
Yeah,
How, like, what are you using to have a one? I'm guessing it's really hard to have a one size fits all
yeah, yeah,
measures. So yeah, I guess my question is, can we dig into how you're measuring some of these
yep.
things and how you're applying them in various areas?
And you touched on it earlier too, when you were talking about how, these maybe smaller vineyards, or vineyards that are going to have harvest, it comes all at once, and you need, a whole crew of laborers to come in for pruning or for harvest. And so there's a frequent common use of labor contractors here. And so the labor contractors, some of them I think can be very great, very good to their, treat those, they're not really employees, but treat the laborers quite well with providing, fair pay and ensuring similar benefits to what the staff might get. But we do have our criteria that go into much more detail on this, and we have a whole section about the use of labor contractors. So if a farm is using recruited or contracted labor, then there's certain provisions that the employer needs to prove that they have done to ensure that these people are getting the same rights and treatment as the direct employees. And then we have auditors who will be going out to verify that. And so in this case, what we're finding here in the domestic market is it's really tricky, because those labor contractors don't necessarily have to answer to the auditors.
Right.
And it may put the farmer who is aiming for the rock certification, it may put them at a disadvantage now, because the labor contractors are like, oh gosh, I don't want to work with those folks over there, because then they're going to have an auditor try and look at all our paperwork, So
Right.
it's going to require, I think it's just going to be a long road, and aiming for more transparency and ensuring that these same standards apply to all the employees, and that that there's an access to a grievance process is one example, or that there's the right to be free of forced labor, and that they can't have any unfair deductions from their paycheck. And some labor contractors do many of these things, and
Mm.
yeah, there's certainly a lot of different ways it can go south. And I think in the southeast, there's been some really good work done. The Coalition of Immokalee Workers, if you're familiar with that case, they were,
No, no, go ahead,
yeah.
please.
So it's Food Justice Project, and they, they were basically treating people as slaves and practically chaining them up at night and working all day. And so this coalition of workers gathered and got some support to go and really effectively lobby on behalf of the workers. And they did this by pressuring the companies, the brands that were purchasing these tomatoes for ketchup. So go figure, like some fast food chains. So these large fast food companies were purchasing tomatoes for their ketchup, and sure, they were getting a great price on the tomatoes, but perhaps unwittingly supporting these conditions where people were practically enslaved. So that coalition of Immokalee workers did a lot of great work, and they're continuing to do it. They have a very different approach than what we do, because the ROC program is a voluntary certification. And what we're trying to do is really drive that consumer awareness. And so that consumers can go and purchase this product that has that ROC claim on the front of it, and that it will answer a whole suite of their values, from environmental, ethical, and just like if they're for animal welfare or vegan, like it's going to, vegan folk. I would say that we have a couple very strong voices from the animal welfare community on our board, and we're there at the table at the beginning in the formation of this framework. And they are constantly advocating on the animal welfare side of things, even though they don't even eat animals or livestock products. But for them, it's it's a win-win if you can implement these better practices for animals who are going to be raised for consumption anyway. So that is just something that is, another really important part of the ROC framework, is that animal welfare pillar, and treating the animals well. So, as
Yeah.
I said earlier, all living beings in the system.
Yeah. I love that. uh, well, have you guys? I know you've reached out and done some sort of pilot certifications. This is a new certification in the world of certifications, relatively speaking,
Yeah.
and you've done some pilot projects. Have you considered, or would it even be possible for a vineyard or farm labor contracting company to get an ROC certification?
Yeah, totally. I mean, all they need to do is be transparent with us
Yeah.
and show how they meet our criteria. And we already have a number of them who are cooperating with us, and or with, I shouldn't say with us, but with the auditors who are going out there. And I mean, just to give you a little perspective on that, is we completed our pilot program last year. We did that around the world. We had 19 different pilot farms, some of those representing thousands of growers in smallholder settings. Some of them, here in the U.S., states, we actually did a vineyard in your region, Tablas Creek, who you're probably familiar
Yeah.
with. They've been incredible partners to us, and actually, if you haven't had Jason on your show yet, you should, because he's got such great insight into the benefits of the social fairness certification and what it did for their crew, what it did for morale, and things that they learned about their crew that they had no idea.
That's great.
It was really, it was super inspiring. So they underwent the training with Equitable Food Initiative, where they come out and do a full, like, I think it's 3 full days of training. Everybody out of the vineyard in a classroom setting, essentially, for the whole crew, and a whole, this 3-day course on different labor practices, different ways for management to work with their crew, and for people to work together. And I think they learned a lot by it. So they went through that whole training and got set up for eventually having an audit by a social auditor who came in and interviewed everybody. And they have to be willing to open their books. We are all about transparency, and like looking at a living wage, for example. Every operation needs to be on track to paying a living wage, and it's shockingly harder than you think to pay a living wage. And really difficult to determine what a living wage is depending on where you are. There's a lot of different tools for this, and it's all
Right.
on our website in our framework, and got an appendix several pages long with different resources on how to determine what a living wage is.
Is that something? Is that a resource that, let's say, just your basic winery owner could just go to and look it up and calculate their own
Oh, yeah.
for their?
Yep. The MIT has one too.
Okay.
So you could look up the MIT one. That's for domestic market. It's MIT plus 10% is what the founders of the ROA determined to be acceptable. But I can just tell you that, striving towards that living wage is going to be a struggle. And any operation that comes into the ROC program basically will enter at bronze and progress towards gold over time. So this is builds in this concept of continuous improvement. So you don't simply achieve certification and then stop there. You're always striving to incorporate more regenerative practices and improve, further improve the conditions for your animals, or the treatment of your workers, or further increase their salary from, or their pay from, perhaps minimum wage here in California is on par with living wage in some regions, but you do have to really be specific to the region and look at the cost of living in that surrounding area and what it would take for a worker to support a family.
Right.
And we also have provisions in the framework that will restrict the number of overtime hours that are required. This one seems to be a point of contention because, as some of the farms are telling us that, this is putting us at a disadvantage to my neighbors, because at harvest season, these workers are here to work. They're here to make a lot of money, and they don't want to rest like you all want them to rest. So
Right.
that's something that we're going to have to continue discussing. Right now, we have it as like a 60-hour work week, unless there's, for some distinct periods. But that, people need to rest. They need to have some time off. And so that's, one of those areas of our certification that I think we'll be continuing to discuss. And, if they're going to work overtime, that to ensure that they're getting paid for the overtime, and to ensure that they are allowed regular resting breaks. And that's, those are just, it's a principle that is kind of hard to get your head around, perhaps
Yeah.
if
It
you're working
sounds
like a 40-hour work week. But
right. It sounds like a really complicated and individualized calculation when you come to labor and living wage. And I was talking with another vineyard who's undergoing ROC, going the rock certification, and they were talking about how the number of children is a factor in whether it's a living wage that somebody's being paid. And just once I heard that, I was like, well, there must be. I mean, think about all of the other elements that become relevant to whether it's a living wage or not for
yeah,
per an individual. So that's a difficult one. What are some of the other sort of things have you encountered that are difficult points that you've had an idea going into it, and you've had to expand that idea
right.
and adapt new information as you've gone through this process?
Yeah. Well, I would also want to say at the outset that this framework, the ROC framework, is a living document. And because we're not the National Organic Program, we're going to be more nimble and able to change with the learnings that we're taking in. And so I think everybody recognizes this, and, within the ROA, and we don't expect to be changing or updating the ROC framework all the time. I'm hoping for just once per year. But that, if we get enough stakeholder feedback, and the standards committees will weigh in on these issues, make a recommendation to the board, and then we would change the criteria. And so,
So
for
so you're
that part,
saying if I have a problem with the certification, I shouldn't freak out and start a
exactly.
public PR campaign against the ROC. I should just let you know.
Exactly. That's a
And you
really
might
great,
actually absorb that information and change.
completely.
I
Yeah.
love that. Okay.
Yeah. And we did this during the pilot. We had this whole process where if there was an exemption requested or a deviation from the framework, a significant deviation, then we would have a whole formal process that to go through where it's put before the standards committee of, a team of folks who have expertise in whichever pillar or topic, and they would discuss it, debate it, and then make a recommendation to the board. And so, I think it's really important to have that stakeholder involvement and make sure that we are engaging in conversation with everybody who is implementing this. It's why the section that you and I talked about before we started recording, the section on soil health, where when we were out the gate, the first version of the rock framework was no-till. Then
Right.
farmers were kind of in an uproar, and as you can imagine, it became conservation tillage. And after the results of the pilot and the learnings that tillage is a tool, and it needs to be used wisely and not to overtill, but that the main goal there is to minimize soil disturbance, to minimize destroying that soil microbiome. And so, if it just depended on how deep you till and how often you till. And so now we have a tillage action plan. And that's just a really good example of how this framework has evolved over time and with the input from our valued stakeholders. And that would be farmers out there who this affects.
It,
Um,
I mean, that's a really good example. That and I'm guessing labor is another way. I mean,
yeah,
people who worked where it's almost impossible for there to be a one size fits all solution because of the different laws that are in place in terms of labor in various countries and various states. Even they're
absolutely.
very different, and then just climate and geography in terms of tillage is I can just
Yeah,
imagine there's no way you could ever just have like here's our one regulation thing that you must abide by because it's
yeah,
like you from Northern California to Southern California you can have 100 different
ex-
variations just
yeah,
in this state of what would work best in terms of all the factors involved, carbon sequestering and conservation of soil and and soil health. It could be yeah, like I can imagine every iteration of tillage being good in some spot.
yeah,
How do you do that? Like how does a certification encompass that kind of
yeah.
I don't know if that's a
Well,
problem or an opportunity, but that kind of diversity of need and yeah.
yeah, I think I completely agree with you. You cannot have a one size fits all kind of standard that would work in every unique location. I mean, regenerative practices are going to be as unique as the region in which they are being practiced, the microclimate, the soil, the seeds or the crops that farmer is growing, and how she manages her land. It is all going to, be very unique to that system. If you look closely at our framework, though, you can see that it's very much a practice based
Right.
program. Our certification. So we're going out and looking at practices, and that it seems to have general applicability, and it seems to have really worked fairly well based on testing it out during our pilot. And in the pilot, we were in, we tried this out in all different settings, from annual crops to perennial crops, from temperate zones to semi-temperate zones, with smallholders, with large farms, grass-fed based dairies. We didn't test it out quite enough at enough livestock operations, I would say. And so we still have, I believe, some changes that will be made in the animal welfare pillar, but we really based it off the best of the best animal welfare certifications that exist. And that's one thing that we do, and I didn't mention earlier, and it gets forgive me for getting a little wonky in the certification details, but we recognize 14 different certifications. And so if,
Right.
if a farm comes to us and she has NLP organic, animal welfare approved, and um, fair trade international, then we're going to, it basically will meet many of our requirements, our criteria, and we adjust our basically the organic system plan, the regenerative organic system plan for that operation based on what their existing certifications are. We remove any redundancies essentially so that they don't have to answer the same question twice. So we really strive to remove any kind of duplication. And we're also working with any NOP accredited certifier who's interested in applying for ROC. We welcome them into the fold, and they can have their auditors go through our training program, and then they could start doing these bundled audits where they're going out. And I believe you're certified with CCOF. Is that right?
I mean, we work with vineyards who are.
You work with Vineyard. Okay, so
yeah,
CCF. I spent much of my career there. They're like family to me. They're a great organization. They are quite big now, and they've got really great auditors all over the place and a good reach around California. So I'm hoping that they're going to get approved to do ROC audits, and basically they would be going out to do the annual audit, and then in that same context, at the same time, they would go through the ROC audit. And then that way the farm only has to endure this audit once or twice a year.
right.
It depends. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I would love to have our yard certified, but I don't.
You probably
I don't know that our little lot here in South Central would be worth anybody's time to get certified.
Probably not. No,
I think we meet all criteria, though. I will say
you would qualify then.
Yeah.
You would. So you could go through it and not be required to be certified. Fill out an OSP and put it on file with your county ag office.
That would be awesome.
Yeah. There you go.
That's great. I guess a two-part question for you. What do you see are still some of the biggest problems that we need to solve with our with the way that labor in agriculture is done? Especially, if you can make it about viticulture, that's fantastic. But agriculture generally, what are the biggest problems that we're still facing? And have you seen any creative solutions to some of the problems that we have?
Yeah, I mean it's such a tough question. I think, like, first of all, is this idea that we have a right to have cheap food, right? Like, having cheap food, there's going to be a cost somewhere in that model.
Yeah.
And so, this concept of cheap food means that we think we also get to have cheap labor to pick this food, and that everything is so disposable. And so I think really changing our mindset and valuing the land that produces the food, and valuing those people who are producing it is a really big shift that we need to consider. And as we talked about earlier, I really love the concept of a regional food shed and regional food systems. And so, not just trying to buy in bulk at the cheapest price possible really would require that people become more engaged in their local ecology, their local food shed and farmer network, and see where they can drive their purchases to support what's immediately around them. And by doing that, they're supporting also cleaner water in their own direct region, and minimizing pollution and minimizing carbon emissions from things having to get shipped all around the country and the world. So I think that would be one thing for sure. And just with labor, that we're going to continue to develop this certification here, and that the more consumers inform themselves on what kind of violations to human rights are happening out there in this sector, is it's incumbent on people to really to understand that. And I think you talk a lot about that in your different podcasts, of that I don't know if it's your blog or your podcast, but like, you are a farmer, you make a choice every day, so essentially what you support is what matters. And so I think that is just a really great message, and I love that. It was your blog, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Yeah, you are a farmer. Yeah, I did a. Yeah, it was kind of. I was just trying to figure out how to shorthand what I was trying to say, and I was like, "Well, this is it. I mean, we're all farmers.
Yeah.
The like in trying to get across the power that we have as consumers. That's the best way I can say it.
Yes,
Um,
and that's a good way. It's like empowering people to make those choices and not guilting them into making those choices
right.
is
Yes.
really important because if you think about how lucky we are, where we get to choose what we eat all the
Yeah.
time,
Yeah.
and some of
Especially.
us many times a day, in fact, and maybe too many times a day. And so, but just considering that, like, choose wisely, choose to support what is, really brings more beauty here into your own surroundings and into the lives of those people who are growing your food. It's really hard to farm. The margins are tight. Climate change is making it ever harder to farm. You've got soil eroding at crazy rates. So, whatever we can do to try and stop that and build these healthier networks of farms, healthier soil is going to lead to healthier communities. And people who are being treated fairly and paid fairly and can, have access to health care or health insurance are not going to tap the very systems that people in every region are paying taxes for example. So, it's a pretty, can be a really vicious cycle, or it can be a really beautiful kind of virtuous cycle. So I think, just looking at things in a very holistic way is key.
Do you have? I mean, does being in your position fill you with dread or hope or somewhere in between?
Oh my gosh, no, I am so full of optimism. Like, if I wasn't exhausted half the time because we're so busy. And I mean, people, it's amazing to me how much we hear from people all around the world. I often do very early morning meetings with Europeans. In fact, I have one like 4 a.m. next week. Like, it's kind of stunning how much the word is out and people are really excited by this concept of regeneration, and that we seem to have gotten in this great position of leading this movement, or being one of the very well recognized kind of players in this as it relates to agriculture. And I certainly attribute that to our founders and their kind of they're just legacy companies, with Bronner's and Patagonia both leading the way, and Rodale, of course. Like, we just get a lot of attention. And so for me, the only dread I have is like that I can't get everything done well enough and in a timely enough manner. That's about it.
I feel that. Well, well, so that's probably a good segue to just say maybe we should wrap this up in respect of your time. But
I should
how
probably do something else. You're right.
how do
The,
we find out more? How do people, where's the best resource that people can find out more?
well, I'm glad you asked. Our website is regenorganic.org. I will say, we've focused a lot of our resources on growing a really strong team for implementing this certification, and perhaps too much, because I haven't had as much focus on like being the mouthpiece, being like the communications end of it. But we're coming to a point where that's going to start to happen now. I'm going to be posting an announcement soon, I hope, for a full-time communications person, and then we will be much more active on Instagram. Right now, we do basically a quarterly newsletter, and so we're going to really start to increase a lot of our outreach and our talking. We'll even start a Twitter. So, yeah, we're going to join the rest of the world and start being a bit more vocal and sharing stories of all these farmers who are going through the certification. And we have 100 applicants in the queue. We've had over 350 inquiries and like meetings with different brands and companies and farmers from Argentina to India to Newfoundland. Like, we are all over the world, and there's a lot of exciting stories to share. And now that we've kind of gotten all the pieces together of our certification, and we're really launching into it, it's we're going to start to tell those stories. So Yeah.
I
If
love
you
that.
go to our email list and sign up, then we've got a nice introductory series of readings that'll keep you busy in the next couple weeks, for the next couple weeks, while we get, a new person in position to really help amplify the message and tell these stories.
I love it. So regenorganic.org, and that's also where we could find out about the certifying regulations, things that we would need to do, as well as calculate living wage and things like that. That's all
Yeah.
there. I
Yep.
love it. And sign up for the email list.
Yep.
I
And
love
yeah,
it.
our hashtag on Instagram is Regenerative Organic. But yeah, just go have a look there and follow us, and sign up for that newsletter if you're interested to learn more. Our website has a lot of information about how. And so then the next kind of phase of this is going to be why. Why do we need regenerative organic now?
Hmm.
And what we can do to keep furthering this cause. So I expect some really exciting months ahead, and getting out there and being more of that mouthpiece for this movement.
Great.
So thank you so much for the opportunity to join you, and it's just
Oh,
super engaging to talk to you, and you're doing really a great service with your podcast. I love it.
thanks. You beat me to thanking you. I really appreciate that. Thanks so much. Yeah, can't wait to see what's happened. I hope this really catches on with a lot of people, and glad.
It's catching on. It is catching on.
Yeah.
I won't say like wildfire, but it is catching on.
Thanks so much for listening. I truly appreciate your time and attention, and just want to remind you that this podcast is sponsored by Centralis Wine. And Centralis Wine is the winery that I started with my wife to promote exactly this kind of agriculture that we talk about on this episode. If you want to learn more, please go to centraliswine.com. That's CENTRALAS wine.com. And if you like this podcast, please give us a great review in Apple or Google Podcasts. We really appreciate it, and it'd be a big help since we do this for free otherwise. Thanks. Bye-bye.